Zooey Mama, I'm here to go over 5 of the best tech cards that you can put into your deck to help you steal cubes from your opponent and rank up faster, okay? These cards are very strong because they can hard counter certain decks and certain cards, but most importantly, they aren't seeing a ton of play. Even if you're playing a top meta deck and the deck's just really good and really strong, your opponent knows what's in your deck, what's possibly in your hand, and what you're going to try and play. They're going to play around it. They're going to know if they need to retreat because they can't beat your common play. And so swapping out some cards for some of the cards I'm going over that can hard counter your opponent, but really just take them by surprise, is going to get you more cubes. You're going to snap and your opponent might stick around more often. They're going to stick around to the end of the game because they're not expecting some crazy turn 6. So I just want to cover these cards, and these can work in Conquest, but more specifically, they are very, very good for climbing up ranked ladder on your way to hitting infinite. So first up, we are going over Mobius. Mobius is a good card. He used to be great. When he was a 2-cost card, he got nerfed to being a 3-cost card. But because he got nerfed, people started using cards like Zabu again. Right now, you can go play 10 games in Ranked Ladder. You'll see Zabu, you'll see some She-Hulk, some Scar, you might see some Mr. Negative, Ravana, Sarah. All of these cards, Mobius counters extremely hard, okay? He just does. But he's not seeing a ton of play, so people are playing these cards because they're not too worried about Mobius. So just putting Mobius in your deck is going to help you counter a lot of decks, and if you're against a Mr. Negative, they've just got like no chance, okay? Mobius will just win you cubes. If you're against high Evo, you can even slap down Mobius on turn 6 if needed, and then your opponent cannot play in Infinite plus She-Hulk on turn 7 or any kind of Scar or anything. So Mobius, really strong. If you see your opponent play Zabu on turn 2 or Ravana, you can go ahead, snap, and then play Mobius on turn 3. Great strategy. Next card I wanted to talk about is Giganto. Now this one may seem surprising. I don't think Giganto is necessarily a good card. I think he's kind of okay, but nobody's playing him right now. And we are seeing a lot of high Evo. They do run leech. They try and leech you on turn 5. On turn 6, your cards don't do anything. They lose their abilities. If Giganto gets leeched, he's actually better, okay? Because then you can just play him in any lane. And if your opponent doesn't leech you, you can still play Giganto just on the left. He doesn't have the same weaknesses that Blob does. Because of Blob being out, really big power 6-cost card, and Kyera that protects 6-cost cards, Shang-Chi just doesn't hit the same way. Shadow King is still really good though. Shadow King will bring Blob down to 4 power. Leech also ruins Blob. Cosmo, before Blob triggers, will stop his ability. Those cards do nothing against Giganto. Okay, you can't Shadow King him. Cosmo doesn't matter, and Leech even makes him better. So Giganto's a bit of a nice like backup option. If you're against high Evo, it's going to work out really well if they leech you. And otherwise, no one's really expecting 14 power from a single card to come down unless they're expecting, you know, Blob or a high Evo Hulk. So I've been using Giganto just in this high Evo heavy meta, and I think he's always good. Just to throw out there, your opponent is almost never going to play around Giganto. Next up, I'm talking about Legion. Now, Legion sees a decent amount of play. He used to see more when he was first released. He was a 5-cost, 8-powered card, and then he kind of stopped seeing play. Now he seems to see a bit more, but not a ton. And Legion you can just put in any deck, okay? He doesn't really require any kind of synergy. He does have 7 power himself, so he's just a good stat body on the board, and he can win you so many games. And the beautiful thing about Legion is that he can come down on turn 6, and if your opponent did play Magic, they've got Limbo on the board. Legion comes down on turn 6, gets rid of Limbo, and ends the game right then and there. Okay, steals a bunch of cubes. Or if your opponent's playing Lockdown with Storm, you can get rid of Storm's flooded location. So Legion is just so good. There are so many locations that he just wins. Okay, not only does he counter something like Magic or Storm, but there are some locations like Bar with No Name that you can just play Legion on, and that can be the only card you play the game, and Legion will win it for you. Okay, or maybe you've got good early tempo, you play him on the vault, and the game's locked down. So he's very flexible, he fits into a ton of decks, and he just comes in clutch, and people don't often play around him unless the deck you're using typically does run Legion, and there are a couple of those out there right now, but he's just always a great card to have. Next card that I want to talk about is Goose. Goose is surprisingly strong. Okay, sometimes you play Goose and it doesn't seem like it does much, right? Like not much happens. But in reality, it's really on your opponent for them to play around. Okay, it's kind of like Iceman. Hit something in your hand, you don't really know the value. Sometimes with Goose, you're ruining some big combo or big play from your opponent and you don't realize it. And it can just really restrict your opponent. If they do have Zabu, they can try to play around Goose. If they get Zabu turn 2, then they can play a 4-drop on Goose's lane because it only costs 3. But if you're doing Goose then Mobius, you don't have to worry about it. But there are just some decks that you play Goose and it's really going to restrict your opponent. It's basically a free lane for you. If you just have 1 or 2 cheap cards with decent power that you can fit in there. It's even possible if you're running some kind of ongoing deck, maybe you've got an ongoing Spectrum deck, and you're against a deck with a lot of big cost cards, you turn 2 Goose, turn 3 Mystique. I mean, something really cheesy, but that's going to lock a ton of decks out of the game. And so I think Goose is one of these sleeper cards. And again, I talked about Blob earlier. I talked about the strong high evo cards. Goose can just keep those away, okay? And you play it on turn 2, and you just keep some of those decks out. So not a card that can come down on turn 6 to steal a lot of cubes, but definitely I think an underrated card and just counter some decks. And card number 5 that I want to talk about is a card that sees some plays in ongoing metas, but then kind of goes away. I am talking about Super Scroll. Super Scroll is basically just a free win if your opponent is playing multiple ongoing cards. Okay, if they have a full ongoing deck that's like Living Tribunal with Onslaught and Iron Man, some type of shenanigans, or even just a deck with a couple strong ongoings like Darkhawk plus Mystique or Devil Dinosaur. I mean, Super Scroll just hits so hard. Okay, if your opponent is playing a ton of ongoing, you have Super Scroll, you're just gonna win. It's like one of the hardest counters in the game. You just get all their benefit on one single card for 4 costs. So Super Scroll is extremely strong. And the nice thing is he can also come down on turn 6, okay? Maybe leading up to turn 5, your board looks okay, but your opponent thinks they're winning, they snap, they think there's no way they're gonna retreat. Turn 6, you drop Super Scroll, he takes all of their abilities and just boosts your power up on the board, and you just blow your opponent out of the water, okay? He's great at stealing cubes. There's not as many matchups where he will provide big value as the other 4 cards I mentioned, but when he does, when you match up with someone against multiple strong ongoing cards, he's just going to win you the game. Okay, it's that simple. It really is one of the biggest counters around, so don't ever be afraid to try out Super Scroll in your deck, especially depending on the meta, depending on how many ongoing cards people are using. Now lastly, I did just want to mention, if you are having trouble figuring out how to use some of these cards in your deck, how to put them in, you can go with a tempo style deck like the one I'll show on the screen here. This is what I've been playing. It's got a couple of the options I mentioned in this video, as well as some other just good hard counter cards. But even if you don't want to play this, you can play a deck you like, even if it's a top meta deck. Okay, if it's something you found online, Untapped GG, or from a YouTuber or a streamer you like, you take that deck, switch out 1 or 2 of the cards for some of these options I talked about, and even if it makes the deck slightly worse in terms of overall synergy or power, because it's unexpected and your opponents will not be playing around the cards, it actually makes the deck better for climbing and ranking up. Okay, it will literally help you steal cubes from your opponent. So my recommendation is find a deck you're comfortable with. Try just swapping out 1 or 2 cards for some of these surprise hard counter options and see how it goes. So thank you for watching, stay positive, and I'll see you next time.